When he breaks into a home and he shines a flashlight into people's eyes, he witnesses the fear on their faces. He runs a knife along their skin. He presses the muzzle of a gun against someone's head.
Welcome to Very Scary People. I'm Donnie Wahlberg. He was a ruthless predator, a remorseless serial rapist, and a killer on a brutal rampage. He took down his prey with the cold eye of a professional, hunting in the pre-dawn hours, catching his victims asleep in bed. He was a living nightmare who rushed out of the darkness to attack, then disappeared back into the shadows. For more than 40 years, no one could figure out who he was. But the Golden State Killer left key evidence behind. And when police finally put a name and a face to this Phantom of the Night, the mystery of how he got away with his crimes for so long would end in a shocking reveal. This is part 1 of The Golden State Killer.
The worst thing is not knowing when the rapist will strike again, not knowing if you will be his next victim. Hope that he gets caught before he gets to you.
The Golden State Killer is frightening to so many of us because he's a very violent sex offender.
Most of the rapists at that time that we knew of, they were there for the satisfaction of the sex. The Golden State Killer, he was there because of the terror he wanted to put in people.
He showed us who he really was, an extremely angry person who essentially hated women.
In 1976, I was 30 years old, and I was happily married. My husband was a captain in the Air Force at McClellan Air Force Base. I was also in the Air Force Reserves as a flight nurse.
October 5th, 1976.
Jane Carson's husband leaves for work at about 6:30 in the morning.
My little 3-year-old had just climbed in bed with me for a nice snuggle.
Suddenly, just a few minutes later,
the next thing I saw was a light shining down the hall. And then there was this man standing in front of the bed with a ski mask on
and a large knife in his hand.
And the minute I screamed, he said,
"I'll kill everything in the house."
He gagged us both. He blindfolded us both. And he tied us up. And then the next thing I know, he had some kind of cloth that he began ripping in a very ritualistic manner. I'm thinking, oh my God, is he gonna hang us? That was so scary.
Jane's son was just a toddler at the time.
He took my son away. My heart was just pounding out of my chest. What'd you do with my son? Where'd you put him? Then he untied my ankles, and then I knew what he was there for. I don't remember anything about the rape. My whole attention was, where's my son? That was what's so terrifying. He did move my son back next to me. If I hear you move, if I hear anything, I'm gonna come back and kill you.
He would actually stay in the house for hours.
He's going into the fridge.
He's going to go in my kitchen and eat something after he just raped me.
Not only does he possess the victims, he possesses their belongings, he possesses their house.
I knew that I just needed to wait until I didn't hear anything to know that he was gone. I was able to get my blindfold down just a little bit, and then I could look at my son, and I just remember hugging him and just thanking God that my little guy was still there with me.
I was a detective in the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Jane was at a neighbor's house, and I met her there, and I took her to the hospital.
I would sob and sob and sob because of what had just happened. After the rape, I was looking over my shoulder all the time at any male that I came in contact with. I didn't know if he was going to come back. Oh my goodness. I overate. I didn't wear makeup. I isolated. I decided that maybe I could medicate myself with alcohol, and I became very ill.
Is he walking down the street and getting the urge and picking out a house and going in there and perpetrating an attack, or what's behind it?
We had 5 cases that all had the same method of operation. He was entering the homes either through an unlocked door or had forced his way in, and always confronting the victims in bed, shining a flashlight in their eyes. He had a ski mask on.
He's saying the same things to the victims.
Shut up. All I want is food and money.
He always had a weapon, a knife, a gun. We knew that we had one single person doing these crimes.
We've got a serial rapist, and this is a bad guy.
From June 1976 to December of 1977, there were 28 attacks.
And he attacked twice in the same 24-hour period of time.
We responded to one rape, and next thing we know, we're turning around and we're at another crime scene.
We need to do everything we can to stop him.
What is happening is he is prowling a neighborhood.
Reconnaissance and tracking, surveillance, stalking.
He was looking through windows. He was following people home, watching the house to see who came and went.
He knows when the trash man comes. He knows when the milkman comes.
He's already got an escape route plan that would avoid law enforcement's response.
He's crisscrossing like a spider doing a web so that he never comes and goes from the same direction.
Some of these rape victims were repeatedly raped, just act after act after act. Each thing that this person did is a separate crime.
We're seeing this guy for what he is. He's a predator. He's hunting human beings.
There probably was no other series of cases that were as horrific as the East Area Rapist.
He came running right down the sidewalk, and he looked up and he saw me standing right here.
In October of 1976, 30-year-old mother Jane Carson is sexually attacked by a serial rapist in her own home. Her mysterious attacker goes on to commit one brutal sexual assault after another.
The same incredible, absolutely unbelievable brazenness that has so often characterized his work before. The East Area Rapist is once again struck in precisely the same neighborhood that has been his target so many times before.
There were other sexual offenders and predators out there, but nobody really captured the sort of collective imagination and fear as what we called the East Area Rapist.
So what will you do now? Have the dog in the house, big dog.
The victims were very consistent in describing a white male, somewhere between 5'8" to 5'10", reasonably athletic build, 160 to 180 pounds.
We knew he had a size 9 foot from the footprints.
We got all sorts of eye color, blue, green, brown.
We didn't have that much to go on.
But police gathered 11 different descriptions from witnesses who had seen the unmasked suspect as he fled several different crime scenes.
He came running down right down the sidewalk, and he looked up and he saw me standing right here.
The witness made a sketch of the fleeing man's face in the minutes after seeing him close up.
I'm an art student, and I drew out a picture of him standing next to the tree as I saw him, and I drew a picture of him running down, front and back.
But investigators were not able to positively identify a suspect from that sketch.
Nothing they did seemed to be able to stop this person. He just kept going and going.
And then he targets a 13-year-old schoolgirl named Margaret Wardlow.
My parents were divorced, and I was living with my mom. My mom was a single parent.
She's living in a 2-story structure that backed up to the levee to the American River.
I was only 13 years old. I never considered the fact that I might become a victim.
It's very possible he's just wandering along the levee looking into houses and sees Margaret and decides, you know what, I'll take the risk, but I think I can get away with it.
I went to bed fairly early, and I was awoken with a flashlight in my face. And it didn't take me very long to realize that it was the East Area Rapist. I was blindfolded, I was gagged. My hands and feet were both tied.
The mother was in another bedroom, and the rapist went in there and tied her and bound her and gagged her.
There's no question the East Area Rapist really got off on inflicting fear.
Everything that he said was in this harsh whisper. Do you want to die? Do you want me to kill your mother? And I realized it right at that very moment. He's going to rape me.
This is not just about the rape. This is about causing incredible fear and exhibiting a rage.
After we realized that he had gone, my mom started screaming out for the neighbor to come. And he came over with a shotgun. And then the neighbor's wife came in and untied me. My mom was in shock after what happened. My mom took it really, really hard.
My role was to be there to interview the victims as soon as possible after the rape had occurred.
I was hoping that they would catch this guy.
A man downtown calls the police department and says, I know the identity of the East Area Rapist. And the officer that they dispatched to take that report is Joe D'Angelo. D'Angelo writes nothing in the report about what the man says, just the letters HBD, has been drinking, and closes the file.
After a stint in the military, Joseph D'Angelo got his degree in criminal justice and joined the Men and Women in Blue.
He moves to Exeter and becomes a police officer for 3 years.
There was a huge increase in burglaries, and the department was really struggling to find the culprit.
He was very proud whenever he wore a uniform.
D'Angelo was kept busy on patrol, but on off hours, he had a seemingly traditional home life as a family man.
Joe D'Angelo and Sharon got married in 1973.
We call her Sherry. They were happy together.
Joe's childhood friend Judy Schneider and her parents were Joe's very special guests at the wedding.
When you look at the wedding picture, you can see the pride in Joe's face. You can see the pride in my parents' face.
And the strong bond D'Angelo shared with Judy and her family grew as Joe became a father.
They'd come out here to the house all the time and visit Mom and Dad, bring the babies, and they were very proud parents. His wife was in law school at the time. My sister and I, would go out and babysit, because then we found out, Joe was helping putting her through school. He worked nights. Joe would be fixing dinner or paying bills, shopping. He was doing all that so that she could have the time to go to school and not be disturbed with other stuff.
The women he was attracted to were very strong women, very outgoing. This is not a man who surrounded himself with meek women.
And in 1976, Mr. D'Angelo relocates to another Sacramento area police agency, the Auburn Police Department.
When he's in Auburn, he begins not only as a patrolman, but he is at the bottom of the rung. And he is sent out to take a report of a broken manhole cover or barking dogs. This is the lowest of the low policing, but he never takes initiative to try to rise above that. He remains on patrol.
I talked with Chief Nick Willick. I initially called him up and I asked him if he remembered a Joe D'Angelo. He goes, oh yeah, I was his sergeant. Joe D'Angelo was not a very good law enforcement officer.
He was not really popular among the officers. They did sense something in him that did not seem to allow him to fit in to the ranks.
He liked the trappings of being a police officer. He liked the power, the control, wearing a gun.
You think that you're safe because your husband is in bed alone with you? You think he can protect you?
The East Area Rapist is different. He terrorizes his victims.
He's now calling the victims after he's attacked them and letting them know he's still around. I'm still here. He likes that fear.
The problem is no one knows where or when he'll strike again.
The East Area Rapist seemed to know everything that we were doing.
We knew that he was reading the newspaper.
He has never been caught in a home where there was a man present.
He goes, I'll show you. I'll show you who I am.
Joanne Meow and her husband lived in the city of San Jose.
I was a nurse at Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto. I also wanted to start a family.
December 2nd, 1978, you have Joanne and her husband asleep in their bed when a masked man with a gun comes in.
I woke up to a flashlight in my eyes, and this guy's yelling, I have a gun. I screamed at the top of my lungs.
He ordered Joanne to tie up her husband, and then he tied up Joanne by her wrists and her ankles.
He brought that gun to my head. I thought this was gonna be it. And then he got a plate and he put it on the back of my husband.
And he said, if these plates fall, I will hear it and I will kill you. He took Joanne into the living room and raped her multiple times.
I just kept on saying to myself that you're not gonna get me. You either survive or you don't. I heard the refrigerator open and then him crying.
The victims report that the offender, usually after the sexual assault, would kind of isolate himself and they'd hear him crying. My mommy's making me do it.
What's going on with this guy?
Clearly he has some deep-seated issues from childhood that are behind these attacks.
Finally, I couldn't hear anything. So then I got up and somehow I was able to dial 0 to get the police. I went to the hospital. They didn't have rape kits or counseling services. My husband and I really never talked about what happened to us that night. I wasn't allowed to talk about it, which I don't think was good for me.
Joanne held back powerful emotions.
Tension and a lot of grief, and shame and guilt, but mostly grief.
About a year into the East Area Rapist attacks, Sacramento detectives get a call from a police department in Visalia, California. They think they have a potential lead.
Visalia experienced a rash of residential burglaries, about 120 cases.
It was a streak of alarming home invasions from 1974 to 1975, ending just 6 months before the start of the East Area Rapist in Sacramento.
They called him the Visalia Ransacker.
And police felt he had a number of similarities to the East Area Rapist.
Did the Visalia Ransacker evolve and become the Sacramento Rapist?
It was a theory, a good theory.
He was about the same height, same weight.
Both offenders ransacked and burglarized.
The Visalia Ransacker would go into the homes when people were away from the homes.
They would come home and find their house completely ransacked. Items were pulled out of the drawers, out of the cabinets, strewn on the bed.
There is a sexual component to these burglaries.
He would take out bra and panties and lay it out on the bed, almost anatomically like a person was laying there.
He was masturbating inside the homes.
This pattern does fit the evolution of a serial rapist.
Somebody doesn't wake up one day and just become a very experienced predator. This behavior starts at a much earlier age.
An offender learns over time how to commit crimes.
How to break in without being caught. What kind of a weapon do I need to bring with me?
So they get better and better.
If these serial crimes were perpetrated by one lone predator, police now had something deeply troubling to worry about: an evolving, angry sex predator with a sinister urge to commit murder.
He witnesses the fear on their faces. You can think about him witnessing these women's reactions to seeing their husbands or boyfriends killed. He would have enjoyed that.
Welcome back to Very Scary People. I'm Donnie Wahlberg. The East Area Rapist has been playing a haunting game of catch me if you can with investigators, while he continues his reign of terror in Sacramento. But after committing dozens of rapes, he mysteriously vanishes, leaving frustrated law enforcement agents to wonder if the East Area Rapist is gone for good, or if he will return one day as a killer.
They shut our task force down, and even though we were told, let it go, we couldn't.
That was the hardest part for me to deal with, that there was no closure.
With an offender like this, and I've seen it with psychopathic individuals, they get bored with what they are doing and they ratchet it up and they take on new challenges.
The biggest fear for me was that my next call was going to be a homicide call. We had so much fear that this man was ready to kill.
Approximately 3 months after the East Area Rapist has his last attack in Northern California, a series of homicides begins in Southern California. And women and couples start being killed in their beds.
The killer was somebody who could blend into these upscale communities.
The couples that were being targeted were in no way related to crime. They had no enemies.
Dr. Robert Offerman, who was an orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Deborah Manning was a psychologist. Lyman Smith was a former DA. Charlene Smith was his wife. She was running her own home-based business, selling different types of jewelry.
Manuela Whithun, a loan officer, was raped and murdered in her home. Keith and Patty Harrington, a young medical student and a nurse.
It's very scary because there's really no clues, nothing left behind about who the offender is that's committing these crimes.
As this terrifying new serial killer emerges in Southern California, Joseph D'Angelo has been an Auburn police officer for 3 years. Auburn is located right outside of the city of Sacramento.
That part of his career ended when he was caught stealing.
D'Angelo's arrested for shoplifting, dog repellent, and the hammer.
It was a very stupid thing to do.
It's what's happened afterward in apprehending this man that has kind of blown the mind of the deputies who are taking the report.
When 2 sheriff's deputies arrive at the store, they're surprised to find the clerks have tied D'Angelo up in a chair.
He's faked a heart attack. He's began ranting and acting crazy and insane. And then when the deputies arrive, he says he's got a head injury. But the moment that the clerks leave the room, the insanity act stops. The deputies are so concerned of what they've just witnessed that they call Auburn That's why he loses his job instantly. Not because of the hammer, but because of what happened in the arrest.
And so the process to terminate was underway. There is an internal affairs investigation. No longer be a police officer. He's been terminated. He's been shamed in that community, whether it's from the termination or there's something else going on in his life at that point in time. He still has that anger. He is mad at his circumstances. So what does he do?
I'm the surviving daughter of Sherry Domingo, who was one of the murdered victims in the Golden State Killer case. My mom met Greg when she was newly divorced. She was a single mom on a budget. What really made Greg attractive was his personality. Greg was just so down to earth. The relationship between me and my mom was really complex. As a teenager, I had already started to desire kind of that independence. I was 15 at the time, just a few weeks before my 16th birthday. Mom and I had been arguing a lot that summer. I had had this argument with my mom on the phone. I had yelled at her, "I don't have to comply with your rules anymore. I'll just go wherever I want." And I disappeared. The next day, I got another phone call, and it was from my mom's best friend. The tone of her voice convinced me that maybe there was something important enough that I really did need to come home. Over the years, my mom and Greg would be together, and then they would break up, and they would be together again, and on again, off again. But when I saw Greg's car, for some reason, I got this little glimmer. I thought, oh man, if Greg's here, everything's gonna be okay. I said, I wanna see my mom, I wanna see Greg. And finally, somebody said, no, you can't go in. It's too messy.
They were in a downstairs bedroom, and in bed, the offender appeared to have gained access to the house by opening a bathroom window.
There were deep shoe impressions in one specific spot in the bathroom carpet, which would indicate that he stood in that particular spot for a very, very long period of time.
The door that led into the bedroom was a little bit warped, so when the door opened, it made a scraping noise. We believe that it was probably that gave Greg the ability to get to his feet and lunge at the offender as he made entry into the bedroom.
Greg had to go into fight mode to try and save his own life and my mother's.
Greg actually gets shot through the left cheek. It's a non-fatal wound.
It was enough of a blow that dropped Mr. Sanchez to his knees.
If I close my eyes, I can picture that bedroom, and I can picture Greg fighting for his life. At that point, I think is probably when he went and tied my mother. Her legs were pulled up behind her, and the wrists and ankles bound together behind her back.
Sherry was killed by multiple blows to the head. In the midst of this,
he's constantly having to go back and deal with Greg.
It looks like he probably rushed the offender and gets shot again. He goes crumpled down in the closet.
And that is where he died and was found deceased.
How is he able to commit these very violent acts and then walk away and presumably have a lot of blood on him and not have people notice?
Working in these cases takes over your life. It gets in your mind. I still to this day can't take a shower without someone else in the house. I don't like to put my head back with my eyes closed. The shower running over my ears because I can't hear what's happening. That's changed me. Women and couples start being killed, usually by bludgeoning, sometimes by getting shot. And it was one offender, a serial killer.
He fed off of their terror. And the more terrifying he was, the more he enjoyed what he was doing.
He stalked people at night. In Santa Barbara County, a detective there said he's a night stalker.
And he was raping and murdering them. But by that point in time, there was already a night stalker known as Richard Ramirez. So they called him the original Night Stalker.
The way he is eliminating the victims through blunt force trauma is an extremely brutal way to kill anyone. He was able to escape.
He disappeared for the next 5 years.
No one's sure why there was no homicides between 1981 and 1986.
There could be some very logical reasons. It takes a lot of strength and physical fitness to commit a murder, to break into somebody's home. And so there could have been the aging process, but the urges to continue to do what he was doing were probably still there.
And then, I believe, somehow, some way, he sees Janelle and he can't help himself.
Janelle Cruz, my older sister by 1 year. She was 18 and I was 17. She was like Marilyn Monroe. She could walk down the road and guys would just be staring at her. She was actually getting ready to go to college. She was looking forward to a lot of different things.
Janelle Cruz happened to be home alone. Her family ended up doing a vacation down in Mexico.
She had a friend, a male friend, over to the house. We know what happened because he lived to tell about it.
They were listening to music. They did hear noises. They disregarded those noises as maybe it was a cat outside. So they closed the shutters and continued listening to music.
Janelle's house backed up to a park, and there's a low wall that separates that park to her rear yard. It appears that he ends up getting into her house through a sliding door at the rear of the house.
At that point in time, the young man decided, it's getting late, I better leave. That was about 11:15 in the evening. He left.
And not too much later, she was fighting for her life. At midnight, another one of our friends had returned a phone call and Janelle never answered.
Hours later, the body of Janelle Cruz was found in her bedroom.
Janelle showed evidence that she had previously been bound, but the bindings had been removed.
He didn't leave her tied up for the investigators to find. He was trying to throw them off. The difference of Janelle Cruz's case was that it was more violent than the others. The offender not only bludgeoned her by the back of the head, he had bludgeoned her in the forehead, across the bridge of her nose. She swallowed her teeth.
She's the one victim where the offender hit her in the face. He's face to face with her versus the other victims were always face down. There's a reason he's doing this.
Firing a gun is noisy. He knew he's in an affluent neighborhood. Gunshots are not normal. Bludgeoning is, it's quieter.
The offender is progressing.
What has caused that level of anger, or has it actually been elevated to hatred? Because hatred and anger are not the same emotions. And if you hate someone, you're able to turn them into an object. She was depersonalized by him, which does suggest that he hated her.
Janelle had been raped before she was killed.
The way in which Janelle Cruz's body was found, one arm was located raised slightly above her head. I believe this indicates that she fought back against the offender, was able to flip over, and was fighting with him.
And that's what haunts me all the time, is just how she died. I still live my life in fear because I didn't know who killed Janelle. So I didn't know if they were watching me or following me.
What made it more terrifying is, what if one day they decide to flip that switch again and go back to their violent tendencies? That is scary.
people that are involved in serial sexual murder don't go home at night and regret what they did. They enjoy hunting for human beings. They enjoy wrapping them up in ligatures and sexually assaulting them. To you and me, that sounds horrific. They don't care.
In 1986, the homicide of Janelle Cruz was the last known original Night Stalker murder.
How does this guy keep getting away? How is he evading everybody? Maybe something else is gonna happen that's gonna cause him to commit a different type of crime and get caught, but it never happened.
They're chasing ghosts.
Then as time goes by, you start losing a little bit of hope.
Years pass, and the cases go cold.
I felt like he was out there watching everything going on.
As the case went cold, Joseph DeAngelo settled into a routine life of work and family. In 1986, Joseph DeAngelo and his wife Sharon welcomed their second daughter. A third daughter would follow a few years later.
They would have these weekend family movie nights.
But by the early 1990s, his marriage had fallen apart.
Joe's house was directly behind ours. My family kind of referred to him as Mr. Mom because Joe had raised his three daughters, from what I could tell, mostly on his own.
He saw that his daughters had whatever they wanted. Horse riding lessons, skating lessons. Maybe he was trying to compensate for the family he didn't have as a child.
The kids seemed really happy. I've known Joe since I was 14. When he asked me if I could babysit, I said, yeah, sure. He would never say why or where he was going. He would just go. He was never dressed up like he was going out for dinner. He just seemed to always wear a t-shirt. He never seemed like happy or sad when he came back. He was just very much business as usual. He was always building things. He built them a pool and he built them a shaded area for the pool.
He ultimately gets a job as a truck mechanic
at a local grocery distribution center, Save Mart.
I started in 1993 as a driver, and Joe was a very good mechanic. He had a good work ethic. He could fix just about anything on the trailer.
Joe became close friends with one of his co-workers.
I've been to his house. I've met his family. He was a compassionate person. We went out 3 or 4 times a week sometimes. He was a happy fisherman. He would love to catch fish.
Can you imagine when it was in action and it was blasting them freaking guns and shit? Fabulous, dude.
But while one minute he was friendly Joe DeAngelo, in the next minute, he could show a much more explosive side of himself.
Being curious little kids, you would sometimes look through the fence slats and see in other people's backyards. He was the scary man on the other side of the fence that used to yell a lot. He would yell at us to get away from the fence and stop looking at him. We were always told to kind of avoid him by our parents.
His girls were swimming in the pool, and he said, make sure that you stay in the shady part of the pool. And so just to kind of mess with their dad, one of the girls put their arm in the sunny spot and said, look, Dad, I'm in the sun. And he just turned around and exploded at the girl and said, I told you, get in the shade, get out of the sun, it's not okay. And it was just this really huge overreaction. Something just started to feel not right. The house was just very sparse, and it just kind of had this sad feeling to it. There wasn't a lot of pictures. Everything was very brown. The kitchen was empty. Most notably was the fridge. There was like a gallon of milk and some ketchup and like a jar of pickles.
His fishing buddy witnessed Joe's instant fury in a disturbing act of road rage.
We were on our way to the lake, and a gentleman cut us off. Joe ran up to the gentleman's truck, pounded on his window. He was hollering at the guy. He said he would have snatched his eyes out of his eye socket.
But even that was not as disturbing as Joe's admission to hearing voices.
There was one time he asked me, "Do you hear things?" I was like, "Excuse me?" He said, "Do you ever hear things?" And we really didn't get into it. I said, "No, I don't." I thought it was very strange at the time he asked me that.
We were dealing with somebody who was very intelligent. He would see what was happening, so he had all of this information.
He was always steps ahead of me.
I was of the opinion he was dead, and then to learn that not only is he not deceased, but he's living a stone's throw away from myself and, still in this community, was very jarring.
I decide I'm going boots on the ground where this guy was living.
Someday in the future, he would die in prison.
After more than 40 years, over 50 rapes, 13 murders, and countless dead ends, there's a stunning break in the case. Investigators are finally closing in on this brutal and elusive serial rapist and killer. To take down the Golden State Killer in Part 2. I'm Donnie Wahlberg. Thanks for watching. Good night.